Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the Forgotten War happened when North Korea invaded South Korea and began a 3-year conflict known as the Korean War? Learn that the war cost the lives of nearly 5 million soldiers, including 40,000 Americans who died defending freedom. Learn how an armistice signed on July 27, 1953, ended the fighting, but not the war, by creating a 2-mile-wide Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, which still separates North and South Korea today. Discover that the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. honors the Americans who served.
Imagine a conflict that permanently redraws the map of Asia.
Right.
A war that brings the world's greatest superpowers to the very brink of absolute catastrophe and, claims the lives of nearly 5 million people.
It's just a staggering scale.
It really is. But now, imagine that decades later, the primary way the average person actually remembers this immense global tragedy is, well, it's a television sitcom.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a massive stack of historical notes, casualty statistics, cultural milestones, and some core philosophical source texts about human liberty. Our mission for you today is to unpack a really glaring historical paradox, the Korean War, which was fought from June 25, 1950 to July 27, 1953.
What's fascinating here is how human memory works on a collective scale, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we are confronted with this kind of structural, messy history.
Yeah, exactly.
Society tends to easily file away the wars with clear-cut, parade-thrown conclusions.
Right, the definitive victories.
Exactly. But when the result is a tense, heavily fortified line in the sand that remains active for decades, well, the collective consciousness struggles. We end up slapping a label on it, calling it the Forgotten War, and just sort of pushing it into the background.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand how a conflict of this magnitude just slips into the shadows, and more importantly, why you absolutely need to remember it, we have to look at the mechanics of how it started.
Right.
Because we aren't just walking through a basic timeline today. We are exploring the very nature of liberty itself.
Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high.
So let's go to the exact catalyst. June 25, 1950. The world is, it's just barely 5 years out from the end of the Second World War.
Right, the dust is barely settled.
Cities are literally still being rebuilt. Entire generations are still recovering from that immense trauma.
The global appetite for another conflict was practically non-existent. People were just exhausted.
Right. But on that specific June day, nearly 75,000 soldiers from the Communist North Korean People's Army surge across the boundary into the pro-Western Republic of South Korea.
Which was a massive coordinated move.
Yeah, I want to pause on the logistics of that for a second.
Yeah.
75,000 troops moving across a border is not a spontaneous border skirmish.
No, not at all.
That requires immense planning, supply lines, and backing. And our sources show they had the full, complete backing of the Soviet Union.
It was an overwhelming invasion. The North Korean forces were heavily fortified and, equipped by the Soviets. They were attempting to take the entire Korean peninsula by brute force.
Just sweep 'em right down.
Exactly. They saw an opportunity in that post-WWWII geopolitical landscape to aggressively expand their ideological and physical territory.
So looking at the sources, I have to ask about the response. Because you have this world that is completely war-weary.
Right.
Yet the United States and the United Nations jump in with this incredible urgency to defend South Korea.
Right.
Why risk a third world war so soon? Like, the dominoes are all set up. Why jump in?
Because the leadership at the time understood the actual mechanics of communist expansion. They recognized this wasn't just an isolated incident or a localized civil dispute.
It was something much bigger.
It was a test. The Soviet Union was essentially probing the boundaries of the free world to see if anyone would push back.
Oh, wow. I actually have the exact quote from U.S. President Harry S. Truman right here in our stack, and it just lays out the factual reality of the threat perfectly.
Go ahead, read it.
Truman said, "If we let South Korea down, the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another."
Swallow up one place after another.
Yeah.
The imagery there is visceral, but it was the absolute reality of the era. The U.S. and the UN forces knew that if they didn't hold that line in Korea, the entire global map was at risk of being consumed by an ideology that inherently denies self-governance.
Right. It wasn't just about one border.
Exactly. Defending South Korea was a definitive, non-negotiable stand against the spread of communism.
And the sheer speed of how this escalated is terrifying, honestly. It goes from a local defense to a massive global clash almost overnight.
Yeah, it really did.
Because holding that line meant confronting not just North Korea and the USSR, but a sudden massive influx of forces from another superpower.
Right. The entry of China completely altered the gravity of the war.
The numbers in our sources are staggering. Listeners, I want you to visualize this. China comes to the aid of North Korea with more than 2 million soldiers.
Which is just, it's an unfathomable number.
2 million. And these troops are highly trained by the USSR. The sheer density of combatants converging on this single, relatively small peninsula is difficult to even comprehend.
The logistical nightmare of that many heavily armed, foreign-trained forces fighting over such a concentrated landmass is exactly what produced the devastating human toll.
Yeah.
When we examine the cost of this escalation, the statistics are just deeply sobering. By the time the fighting finally ceased, nearly 5 million soldiers and civilians had lost their lives.
5 million people
Yeah.
in just 3 years.
A staggering loss of human potential.
It really is.
And looking specifically at the American forces who stepped into that meat grinder to defend the line against communism, almost 40,000 Americans died in action, and more than 100,000 were wounded.
Wait, see, this is where I really had to push back on that forgotten war label. You can't just forget 40,000 dead American soldiers.
Right.
You can't forget over 100,000 wounded veterans returning home, or 5 million total casualties. Was there an active effort to suppress this? Or is it simply a matter of timing?
It's more about the timing and the narrative.
Because people always talk about World War II having these massive, triumphant newsreels, right? And Vietnam had raw television broadcasts beamed right into living rooms. Did Korea just get sort of squeezed out of the media spotlight, like a middle child of global conflicts?
That's a good way to put it. It wasn't actively suppressed, no. But the timing and the nature of the conflict really worked against its place in our collective memory.
How so?
Think of the Korean War as a load-bearing pillar in the architecture of the Cold War. Nobody really pays attention to a structural pillar unless it collapses, right? But it's doing all the heaviest lifting.
That makes total sense.
It didn't offer the sweeping cinematic conclusion of WWII, nor did it have the relentless daily television exposure that defined Vietnam. But more importantly, the public just struggles to remember a war that didn't end with a definitive surrender.
Because the fighting basically stalled out.
Yes, exactly.
By July 1951, which is barely a year into the conflict, everyone realizes nobody is going to win this outright without triggering a catastrophic, potentially nuclear, global destruction.
Right. The immense exhaustion on all sides forced the leadership to the negotiating table.
Yeah.
President Truman initiated peace talks, and the delegations met in a neutral truce village called Panmunjom.
But the talks start in July 1951, and the armistice isn't signed until July 1953.
2 years later.
That is 2 solid years of daily casualties, artillery fire, and death, all while diplomats are sitting in a village arguing.
It's tragic, honestly.
What takes 2 years to negotiate if the territorial lines are basically already at a stalemate? Here's where it gets really interesting.
The primary roadblock wasn't actually about where to draw the border.
Right.
The negotiations ground to a halt over a deeply profound human element. It was about the fate of the prisoners of war.
The POWs. When you read the source material on this, it flips everything you assume about war completely on its head.
It really does.
It wasn't a simple equal exchange like, we'll give you your guys, you give us ours.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of communist soldiers who had been captured by the U.S. and UN forces made a staggering, unprecedented demand.
Yeah.
They claimed they had been forced to fight by their communist governments, and they absolutely refused to return to China or North Korea.
Consider the psychological weight of that exact moment. You have tens of thousands of men sitting in a prisoner of war camp, entirely at the mercy of the enemy they were literally just shooting at. The fighting pauses, the gates are metaphorically opened, and they are offered a free ticket back to their homeland, and they say, no. Whatever awaits me back in that communist system is worse than remaining a captive here.
They actively demanded asylum in non-communist territories. The ideological blow that must have dealt to the communist leadership is just massive.
Huge. It was deeply embarrassing for them.
You have the U.S. refusing to force these men back into a regime they are fleeing at gunpoint, while North Korea and China are demanding their soldiers be returned just to save face. How do you break a diplomatic deadlock when tens of thousands of human lives are just refusing to move?
Well, the Allied pressure and the sheer logistical reality of holding those prisoners eventually forced a concession.
Okay.
North Korea and China yielded to the American demands. They agreed to allow those specific POWs to be granted asylum and remain in non-communist territories in exchange for the prisoners who actually wanted to return home.
Which triggers two of the most massive logistical operations of the era.
Yes. Operation Little Switch came first,
Yeah.
which was the highly sensitive transfer of the sick and wounded prisoners.
Right.
And once that proved successful, it paved the way for Operation Big Switch.
Operation Big Switch, I mean, the processing of tens of thousands of individual asylum claims, the physical transportation of the men, the heavily guarded handoffs, it's a monumental feat of logistics and human rights.
It really was.
And it is the specific mechanism that finally allows the ink to dry on the agreement. July 27, 1953, the armistice is signed. So after 3 years and 5 million lives, what did the physical map actually look like?
Well, South Korea remained a separate, non-communist country.
Okay.
They retained all the territory they held before the 1950 invasion, and the agreement actually awarded them an additional 1,500 square miles of territory.
And that new border created a geographical feature that is still famous and tense even today, the DMZ, the 2-mile wide Demilitarized Zone.
Yes.
It's an unoccupied buffer area, completely carving the peninsula in half. And if you were listening to this right now, the DMZ still physically exists.
It does.
It remains one of the most heavily fortified borders on the entire planet,
Yeah.
completely rooted in this 1953 armistice.
It is a permanent physical scar on the landscape, but those physical borders, that DMZ, and the defense of that extra 1,500 square miles represent something vastly more significant than just real estate.
Yeah, definitely.
To truly comprehend why those 5 million lives were lost and why the defense of South Korea was an absolute necessity, our source material directs us to look at the philosophical bedrock of freedom.
Right.
Specifically, a text detailing the 7 principles of personal and civil liberty.
I'm really glad you brought this up, actually, because this document from our stack completely shifts the perspective of the whole deep dive. It takes us off the muddy, blood-soaked terrain of the peninsula and drills down into the spiritual and philosophical mechanics of why human beings fight for freedom in the first place.
It provides the fundamental context. The text explicitly outlines Principle 7, which is defined as fullness of liberty through unity with God and man.
Fullness of liberty through unity with God and man. Let's break down the mechanics of that statement based on the source.
So the document establishes a core factual truth regarding human existence. It states that the ultimate purpose of God's plan of happiness is to enable us to experience a fullness of liberty.
That's the goal.
That is the design goal for humanity, exactly. However, it explicitly states that this fullness of liberty is not achieved in isolation.
Right.
It is achieved only through unity with God, unity with our families, unity with our fellow men, and by experiencing the atoning power of Jesus Christ.
And the text draws a direct, causal line between that spiritual unity and the concept of civil government. It points out that uniting as self-governed individuals is what physically strengthens civil and personal liberty.
Exactly.
It is the mechanism that magnifies everyone's potential.
That phrase, self-governed individuals, is the absolute key to understanding the entire Korean War.
Okay, unpack that a little more.
When President Truman assessed the Soviet threat, and when Allied forces met the Chinese and North Korean armies on the battlefield, they were fighting a system that fundamentally outlaws self-governance.
I see.
Communism, by its very nature in this context, replaces the individual's unity with God and family with absolute subjugation to the state.
Which adds a profound layer to those tens of thousands of POWs we talked about during Operation Big Switch.
It really does.
Because those men were forcibly stripped of their self-governance and sent to die. When they refused to go back, they were making a desperate grasp for the very liberty described in Principle 7.
Precisely. The ultimate purpose of the plan of happiness requires an environment where liberty exists. Therefore, defending that environment, ensuring people have the right to unite freely and govern themselves, is not just a political choice.
It's a sacred necessity.
The bloodshed in Korea was the physical cost of preserving those ultimate truths. Because that line was held, millions of people in South Korea remain free today to exercise that self-governance.
That is incredibly powerful. So, to you, the listener, I want to pose a question drawn directly from this philosophy. Why do you think it is important to defend freedom?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
When you weigh the staggering physical cost of the Korean War, against this ultimate purpose of liberty, the ability to reach our highest potential through unity, does it change how you view those 40,000 American sacrifices?
It certainly grounds the statistics in profound meaning.
It does. But this brings us right back to our opening paradox.
Right.
We have geopolitical stakes that shape the modern world. We have 5 million dead. We have the unprecedented human drama of massive prisoner asylum exchanges. And we have a fundamental defense of the principles of liberty. Yet, how is this profound era primarily remembered by the public?
Through the lens of pop culture, which reveals a very strange mechanism in how society processes trauma.
For decades, the absolute best-known representation of this incredibly deadly and philosophically vital war wasn't a history book or a museum or a monument. It was a television sitcom, MASH.
The irony is just unavoidable.
Yeah.
A show famous for its laugh track, its comedic banter, and its heavy anti-war sentiment became the defining cultural memory for the war that literally halted the domino effect of global communism.
Why does that happen? Why do we substitute a sitcom for historical reality?
Well, because humor is a highly effective coping mechanism for unresolved anxiety.
Oh, that makes sense.
During the 1970s, the public was dealing with the raw, televised trauma of the Vietnam War while still living under the constant nuclear threat of the Cold War.
Right, everyone was on edge.
MASH offered a way to process the absurdity and pain of global conflict in a safe, controlled, 30-minute format.
And the details of the show's success are just staggering. I mean, MASH stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, right?
Correct.
It was set in one of those medical units in South Korea. But here's the crazy part. The television series ran from 1972 to 1983. That is 11 years.
Which means the fictionalized sitcom lasted nearly 4 times longer than the actual Korean War.
That is just wow. And its saturation of the cultural mindset was total. The final episode of MASH was the most watched television event in history at the time.
What is it? Everywhere.
But a sitcom, no matter how emotionally resonant or culturally significant, is not a memorial.
No, it's not.
It doesn't honor the specific sacrifices of the men who secured that 1,500 square miles of freedom. Thankfully, there is now an official, physical monument to counter that fictional memory.
Yes, the Korean War Veterans Memorial. It sits near the Lincoln Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and it is just a haunting piece of architecture.
Have you seen it in person?
I have, and it features statues of soldiers moving cautiously through rugged terrain, wearing ponchos. It perfectly captures the sheer physical exhaustion, the harsh weather, and the grim determination of the troops.
I've looked at the timeline of this memorial in our sources, and the date it was dedicated is deeply telling. July 27, 1995.
Exactly 42 years, to the day after the armistice was signed in 1953.
42 years. It took over 4 decades for society to finally build a permanent marker honoring the 5.8 million Americans who served in the U.S. Armed Forces during those 3 brutal years.
It's a long time to wait.
5.8 million men and women who stepped up to defend that load-bearing pillar of the Cold War.
And that number, 5.8 million, represents a massive cross-section of the American population at that time.
Which means, statistically speaking, there is a very high probability that someone listening to us right now has a direct blood connection to this conflict.
Very likely, yeah.
So I want to ask you directly, do you have any ancestors who fought in the Korean War?
That's a great question.
I encourage you to take 10 minutes today and search your own family history. You might discover a hero in your own lineage who stood on that peninsula, who helped hold the line against communist expansion, and who was part of that 5.8 million ensuring that the principles of liberty were protected.
Discovering those personal, familial connections is the single most effective mechanism we have to ensure a forgotten war is finally anchored in our active memory.
So what does this all mean? We've covered an immense landscape today. We started with the sheer logistical shock of that June 1950 invasion, driven by a communist push to swallow up the map.
Yeah.
We examined the terrifying accuracy of Truman's geopolitical assessment, which demanded a global response. We faced the sobering reality of 5 million human lives extinguished.
We analyzed the profound psychology behind the stalled peace talks, too. The incredible courage of tens of thousands of POWs who demanded asylum, leading to the massive logistical achievements of Operations Little and Big Switch.
Right, and we traced the physical scars left on the earth, like the enduring 2-mile-wide DMZ. And most importantly, we connected those physical battle lines to the philosophical bedrock in our sources, the 7 principles of personal and civil liberty.
Exactly.
The fundamental truth that a fullness of liberty comes through unity with God and man, and that protecting self-governance is an absolute requirement for human potential.
Which leaves us with a heavy but necessary consideration. If a conflict that literally drew the modern boundaries of global liberty, established a permanent demilitarized zone, and claimed the lives of 5 million people can quietly slip into the shadows as the forgotten war, what vital foundational struggles happening in our world right now are we at risk of forgetting tomorrow?
That is the exact question you need to carry with you. We are so glad you joined us to unpack this immense stack of history and philosophy today. Thank you for taking this deep dive.
It's been a profound journey.
Because the more we understand the mechanics of the forgotten corners of our past, the better equipped we are to protect the liberty of our present. You have the key to that collective memory drawer now. Don't let it stay locked. Keep exploring, keep questioning. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.